It's y'all's job to make sure I don't have lipstick bleed. Am I all right?
No, you look good.
Okay.
Should we zoom in? Wait, hold on. There we go.
Yes.
Okay, I think that's better.
Yes, that looks alright.
Okay.
So first of all, set your name and what's your field of expertise?
I'm Lauren Hamilton Edwards. I am in public policy at University of Maryland.
Now
I'm
we are going to start with. This is something that is always hard to do, like record.
I've been on a TV show, and I heard it from the very beginning. I just looked right at the camera. They were like, "Stop it." Sorry about that.
Don't worry. And the first question is about the Baltimore's current public manager. I want to ask if Baltimore's current public manager is affecting or if it's excluding African American communities.
Most definitely. What's interesting, public management's an interesting field because it's basically business management for the public sector. And a big push in public management has been performance over the last probably 30, 40 years. We have focused on it almost exclusively on efficiency and effectiveness. And so I started my Master's of Public Administration in 2005, and Baltimore was actually used as a case study for us as an exemplar for how a performance management project could be included at the city level. It was called CityStat. It was then Mayor Martin O'Malley. And the idea behind using performance in the public sector is that data should be used then to make public decisions. So for instance, we take in crime data, and when there shows a spike in crime or there's areas with more crime, then we make policing decisions based on that crime data. And so policing, like the level of policing goes way up where crime is high, as well as even the placement of blue light cameras. So if you go to West Baltimore, Poppleton included, you will see more blue light cameras. You'll see more cops and cars. They don't do a lot of foot patrols in those neighborhoods, but they are very heavily policed and filmed at all times. So Chris Hayes of MSNBC wrote a book called Colony and a Nation, and he refers to neighborhoods like this as colonies because they are essentially having government done to them versus government in partnership with, are participating in government in these neighborhoods. And Poppleton is definitely one of those communities. If you look around, they are subjects versus citizens. And that is a massive difference in how neighborhoods are managed versus the neighborhood I live in, which is Riverside, right south of Federal Hill in Baltimore. We see cops, but it's more for traffic stops and that kind of thing on a Friday night because there's lots of bars in Fed Hill. And we have a few blue light cameras, but nothing compared to what West Baltimore neighborhoods have.
Okay, can I stop for a second?
Am I moving too much?
No, you're fine.
I get real excited.
I only think is maybe to raise this a little bit because I feel like it's looking like I don't want it to look like you're looking up.
It does help the double chin though. Just kidding.
Okay, I think that might be. Sorry.
You're fine.
Still new. Okay.
Maybe it's so high.
Too high? A little bit lower?
My first meeting's at 2,
Like that.
so we're safe.
Yes.
Plenty of time to figure it out.
Makes me feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
Okay, but I think that's better.
Yes.
Okay. And then let me make sure that it didn't mess up. No, it's in there. Okay. And then I just want to let you know, we can see your shadow in the computer if that bothers you, or if you're okay with that.
No, I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Fix your hair.
And I think I bumped it once. So So I don't know if you wanted to ask the first question again.
Yes.
If
so
that's
the-
okay, if you're good with
Was
that.
it an okay? Will you be able to use that?
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay, so
So yes, I'm going to ask you if you think that Baltimore current public manager is affecting or is excluding African American communities.
hmm So it does in a big way. The city and how it's managed, any city and how it's managed, affects its citizens. But Baltimore is a big example of this. When I started my Master's of Public Administration in 2005, I was given Baltimore as a case study, as an exemplar case study of how to do performance management. Now, performance management is simply the idea that we're going to take in data about the performance of the city, all sorts of data, and make decisions for the city based on that data. In policing, for example, which is the area where I'm most comfortable with talking about, we take in tons of crime data, and then the police department and the city makes decisions about service levels based on that crime data. So in West Baltimore, where crime is higher, potentially, or it was at one point, then decisions are made to increase policing levels in that neighborhood or increase the number of blue light cameras. And that has a massive impact on the citizens who live in Poppleton and other West Baltimore cities. In my neighborhood, in Riverside, for example, it's just south of Federal Hill, there's a few blue light cameras. I see cops, but it's mainly for traffic stops or B&Es, but breaking and entering. But it's nothing like compared to what it looks like when you go to West Baltimore neighborhoods. Cops are everywhere. There's blue light cameras everywhere, and it's a really it's an obvious force and showing in those neighborhoods. So Chris Hayes of MSNBC calls neighborhoods like Poppleton and other West Baltimore neighborhoods colonies within our nation. Basically thinking about those neighborhoods or the citizens in those neighborhoods as subjects rather than citizens. The way I think about it is that in those neighborhoods, citizens are having government done to them rather being invited to work with government to solve issues. And so, though it's a very direct line from like performance management, something my field holds very dear, to the racism that happens in Baltimore. It's in the very performance measures that we use, for example.
And the other question. Do you think that how these public managers affect racial segregation?
So in this sense, in what I was just talking about, how performance management and relying on data to make decisions, it basically becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in that because now those neighborhoods are monitored more, then crime rates go up even more just from the simple fact they're being watched closer. And so there may be a lot of drug use in Fed Hill, I'm sure there is, but the police are there to see it in western neighborhoods in Baltimore are more heavy. There's a more heavily, rewind, there's a heavier presence of police in West Baltimore to catch any sort of drug deals or whatever's going on with drug use. So there's this self-fulfilling prophecy that then in turn has more racist outcomes and has a more racist presence for citizens in those neighborhoods.
And now I want to talk about the development that is that the state and the city council is implemented in these neighborhoods, which is basically development with displacement, which consists in move the African American communities outside Poppleton and bring like development, but with other people, luxury apartments, retail gentrification. So I want to know your opinion since this political perspective about this project. If they're successful, if they're correct, if there's another way.
So I loved the way you phrased this question about being about displacement and not just gentrification. because gentrification on its own is not necessarily a bad thing. It's when it's gentrification with displacement that's where we see the really bad outcomes. And people get further from their communities, they get further from their work potentially, and further from the city because they can't afford to live here anymore. So I'm in an interesting spot because, to be quite honest, right now I'm a gentrifier. I live, like I said, in Riverside, and the development I live in is one of these apartments that tore down existing row homes to live there. So it's an interesting mix of the old timers in the neighborhood who've been there forever and young professionals and even newly college grads, right? So it's been interesting to have this experience of being part of the problem, essentially, because we wanted to live in Riverside, and it's a great neighborhood. But then you get there and you realize a neighbor was telling me about what the building had used to be, and that when my building went up, it was quick, and the neighbors were really upset because it had displaced. It didn't necessarily displace anyone, but it made it a lot harder for the people on either side of the apartment. And so there's that aspect of it, of displacement. But then there's also the aspect of changing the nature of the neighborhood that I think makes my neighbors incredibly sad. It is just not what it used to be. And so, like, we do have our squirrel guy. I call him Squirrel Guy. I don't really know his real name, but he actually goes and feeds the squirrels in Riverside Park, and I see him there on my walks all the time. One day I got to ask Squirrel Guy how long he'd been feeding the squirrels. It's been like 50 years he's been at this, right? Just taking a $1 general thing of nuts to go feed the squirrels. I think that's lovely. That's character. Riverside is losing that. Locust Point is losing that. It is worse in the African American communities, and that's I just wanted to use that as an example to get to this, that when those neighborhoods lose their character and the people within them, they're losing the history. People are coming in who don't even know what parks they're walking in, the history of the neighborhood, nor do they care. It's a complete difference between my young neighbors and my old timers, that I call them. They're not as understanding of why Riverside Park is important, for example, the role it had in the War of 1812. So Baltimore is a beautiful historical city, and we're discounting the history of a place when we're displacing the people who made it. The other part of it is our history is just very racist. So those neighborhoods were developed in a racist manner. They were out of what we call the black butterfly. And so they persist. The effects of redlining persist to this day, even though redlining is still illegal. And so not only have we confined them to certain African Americans to certain neighborhoods, we then displace them because all of a sudden their land is desirable for more worthy residents. And so it's disheartening to know that only 20% of the development that Poppleton is talking, or the developers in Poppleton are talking about, are retained for the citizens who are already there. Because then that means those folks have to leave, they're displaced, and the neighborhood becomes just another neighborhood in Baltimore. And it may be still called Poppleton, but it won't have the same characteristics.
Yeah.
Did that answer the question?
Yes,
Because I feel like I did this.
No, okay. After, there is like a lot of editing.
Mm-hmm.
And now I wanted to, because I don't know if you know, but the only person that have the power to stop displacement, because this development project is based in eminent domain,
Mm-hmm.
and the only person in the city that can stop an eminent domain project is the mayor.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask you if you feel comfortable to talk about Mayor Scott And how is he doing in this aspect of the policy of the city?
I'll tell you I know very little, but I can talk generally about some other development areas as well. So Mayor Scott has been an interesting mayor. He's just completely broken the mold, in my opinion, of what Baltimore has seen as mayors, at least in my time here. I can't get a handle on what Mayor Scott and development efforts and how he feels about development efforts, I should say. There's a current development with the maglev train that was voted down by a community group or neighborhood group, and the city didn't support the development either. And so maglev is right now not going forward in Baltimore because of this one neighborhood standing up against it, essentially, and the mayor and the city backing that neighborhood group. So I don't know if the same will happen in Poppleton, because I don't feel like citizens have enough of a voice to get that message to Mayor Scott. I hope so. I mean, that would be my hope, because I do believe the only solution to developments like this, and not anti-development, not at all. I am for community engaged development, meaning that you're not just bringing in city elites into the conversation, because of course they want development. Of course they want high dollar high rises with larger salaried folks able to live there and provide a tax base for the city. What I mean by community is the direct community of Poppleton, that they are brought in. Sorry, was that me? Okay, so sorry about that. I thought it was about to ring. What I mean by community or engaged development is not just bringing in city elites, but bringing in the people of the Poppleton neighborhoods and making sure they have a voice from the very beginning. So we can't turn back time and have them as part of this development plan now. I'm sure some of them might have been, but our Community Reads book at UMBC this year is We Speak for Ourselves by Dee Watkins. He is a writer, or author, and professor at Coppin. And the basis of his book and what it meant so much to me is that so often elites speak for these neighborhoods in West Baltimore or anyone else. And in his book, he talks about how elite faculty members often speak for the Black community. And his point is, they do not speak for me. I speak for myself. I tell my own story. I don't need you to tell my story for me. And so I think that in community engaged development, what that means and why I think Dee Watkins' message is so important is that it means that we get information and from the citizens who are impacted, not just the leaders of neighborhood groups, not just city council members, or who I would call the city elite, but from the neighbors themselves. What do they want? Maybe they're interested in better housing, and so then they wouldn't be anti-development, but it needs to be available for them. And maybe they can work a deal out where it is. Or maybe they can step in and say, okay, you can put up your high rise, but we need 30% to be for low income. And we need you to develop a park, or we need you to do something else for this neighborhood as a trade-off so that you get your money and we get to retain our neighborhood and the character of our neighborhood. Because right now, how it appears to me is that neighbors were left out of that conversation. It is easy, the comeback I often get when I talk about citizen engaged decision making is that citizens don't want to be involved. And it's a fallacy. I don't buy it. It just means we're really lazy. And whether it's city government, state government, we can be really lazy about reaching out to citizens. We think a survey is reaching out to citizens. It is not. It's door-to-door knocking. It's having town hall meetings where citizens have the opportunity to speak up and not just get information. A lot of our town hall meetings are all about let us give you an hour-long presentation about development, and then you get 15 minutes of open time to ask questions, or 30 minutes. And no one, I mean, they listen to comments from citizens, but they're not really that interested. In a previous life, I worked for a city in Texas, which seems like decades ago. And just for instance, we were working on a neighborhood development project, and we had a neighborhood retreat, a 4-hour meeting. 72 members of the neighborhood came in that particular neighborhood because we knocked doors. And not only did we knock doors, we left flyers and we sent it in their water bill, and we took a Spanish interpreter with us on that because it was a heavily immigrant community, to make sure that we were as open and transparent as we could when we went to doors, and that citizens knew that they were truly welcome. And they got to define the problems of their community, because the citizens aren't the problem, right? It could be that the policing's the problem, trash pickup's the problem. It could be the potholes in the neighborhood. It could be any number of things that you wouldn't understand if you didn't live there. Yet we come in as city management, whatever, field our department we're in, we think we know better. And so citizens lose their voice because we just think we can do it for them. And in reality, citizens know so much more about the conditions on the ground of living in that neighborhood. It reminds me of, I forgot when it was, I think it was the previous administration. President Trump had said something bad about Baltimore in the news, and a lot of Baltimoreans spoke up and was like, we love our city. But then there were some Baltimoreans who said, I don't agree with President Trump on anything, but he's right, our city has issues. And we need to be able to talk about our issues. But I don't care what he thinks our issues are. Let's talk about what I know our issues are. And that's the kind of conversation I think this particular development is missing. And where a developer can help a neighborhood rather than just seeing themselves as builders or saviors coming to totally improve a neighborhood, but it doesn't actually improve the neighborhood for the people who live there.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes,
Good.